Well, good morning, good Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. So in the 23rd Psalm, a psalm that we all know really well, it says in verse 4, Gam ki elech begetzal mavet, lo irara ki atayim imadi. Lo, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I'm often haunted by these words, the valley of death. And somehow as we walk through this valley, we're supposed to not be afraid. But is it even possible? It actually tells us, Ki ata imadi, that we can rely on God because you, God, are with us as we walk through this valley. Yet that promise still does not always settle my soul. This last Thursday was, as we know, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, when we remember the lives of 6 million holy flames that were snuffed out, along with millions of others during World War II. We often throw around this number, 6 million, but that is such a large number, it is hard to wrap your head around. Just to give you an idea, there are 6 million Jews in the United States today. And even though everyone thinks, oh, Jews are everywhere, we're still only 2% of the U.S. population. And so if you were to wipe out the entire population of the Jewish population of the United States, that's how many Jews were killed in the Holocaust. If you were to count 1 minute, listen to this, if you were to count 1 minute for each victim of the Holocaust, it would take you about 11 and a half years to recite all of their names if you did it nonstop. If you just, for 11 and a half years, just rattled off their name every minute, it would take you 11 and a half years. 3/4 of all European Jewry were murdered. That's 1/3 of the entire Jewish population. In 1939, prior to the Holocaust, there were approximately 16.6 million Jews around the world. Today, there are only about 15.8 million Jews worldwide. What that means is 80 years later, we still have not recovered as a population. We still have not even reached pre-war numbers 80 years later. That, my holiest brothers and sisters, is what a genocide looks like. Just over a week ago was also the 82nd anniversary of one of the most remarkable moments of that long, dark season, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The Nazis deliberately timed some of their worst atrocities to take place on Jewish festivals as a way to not only physically kill Jews, and it was also an attempt to kill the Jewish faith. So they planned to liquidate the Warsaw Ghetto and murder all of its inhabitants on Passover 1943, to prove on the Jewish Festival of Freedom that the God of freedom did not exist, and if he did, he had abandoned the Jewish people, right? Passover is all about our deliverance, and so on purpose, they decided not just to liquidate the ghetto and destroy the Jews, but to do it on Passover to counter that narrative. However, somehow Jews within the ghetto heard about this plan in advance, and although they were weakened by starvation and disease and had only a handful of weapons, they were determined to organize a collective act of defiance. And for those of us who are familiar with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, it was very successful for about, I forget how many weeks, until finally the Nazis brought in more and more troops and they pretty much destroyed the ghetto as a result. In fact, according to Britain's former chief rabbi, Lord Jonathan Sacks, great rabbis who were in the ghetto supported the uprising. They said this persecution is different from all others in Jewish history. In the past, Jews were persecuted by people who wanted to forcefully convert us. But the Nazis did not want Jews to convert. They wanted them to die. So, said the rabbis, we must defy them by refusing to die, by fighting for the right to live. They knew that almost all of them would die anyway, but they wanted to make a protest in the name of life, and they did so with immense courage. Those Jews, and even great rabbis among them, knew that surrounded by the German army, they couldn't win. But they held out for an entire month with sporadic fighting continuing for another 3 weeks. That's amazing. That was actually in my notes. When I said I couldn't remember, I'm glad it was in my notes. They held out for an entire month with sporadic continuing for another 3 weeks. And it was a turning point in Jewish history. Yet, as we gather today, our world is only getting more complicated. As anti-Semitism is on the rise and mass shootings and terror attacks become commonplace. Every year on Yom HaShoah, we say never again, and each year it happens again and again. In Darfur, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Rohingya in Myanmar, the list of genocides since the Holocaust continues to grow. The reality is that never again is now. How are we supposed to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and not be afraid? More than ever, we must continue to tell stories. More than ever, people need to listen. We must continue to pass down the eyewitness testimonies of what humans are capable of doing to one another. We must remember. We cannot ever forget. And we must never naively think something like the Holocaust could never happen again, because it does happen, and very easily could happen to Jews again. This is why you need to hear and retell their stories. This is why we need to stand up against hate and all forms of bigotry. This is why it is so important in our current world of extreme words and distancing from one another, that we, especially as followers of Yeshua, speak words of life, words of unity, words of healing. Ki ata imadi, because you, God, are with me, with us. I'm inspired by a lesson from Rav Abraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, Israel's first chief rabbi, who taught that the light of Messiah, when it blazes in the heart, teaches one to dignify all people. It shall be on that day that the root of Jesse will stand as a sign to the nations, and peoples will seek him, and his consolation shall be dignity. In that teaching from Rav Kook, he quotes from Isaiah chapter 11. Today we remember that 6 million holy sparks were stomped out. And we must never forget. And we also remember the countless others who have been victims of genocide and hate since the Shoah. And we all know way too well within the Jewish community the amount of hate that has been directed towards us since October 7th. May all of their memories be for a blessing. May we be emboldened to continue speaking out against injustice everywhere. I want to invite up my mother-in-law to just share a little bit about her family's experience. As you know, she is a child of Holocaust survivors. And so I asked her if she would just be willing to, just for a couple of minutes, share the story of her particular family.
Thank you, Joshua. Well, both my mother and my father were the children of German Jews. My father's family came from Berlin, and my mother's family came from Stuttgart. What I know about the family is that my mother's side of the family came from Cordova, Spain during the Inquisition and settled in Amsterdam, and then eventually made their way to Mers, Germany, where one of my ancestors was invited to be an advisor to the Baron of that city. And then they settled there, and then the Holocaust came. And my mother's mother married somebody from Stuttgart, so they moved to Stuttgart. And my grandfather was a doctor. And they were arresting Jews right and left, even before the Holocaust ever started. And a policeman came to him and said to him, "Get in bed, pretend you're sick, and they won't take you away." So he did that. He got in bed. He pretended he was sick. The Nazis came for him, and they didn't take him away. On another occasion, he hid in the trunk of a neighbor's house for 3 days. They didn't find him then. And then on another occasion, he was taken to Dachau and released after a month. And upon his release, they had to take a train back to Stuttgart, and he had a cousin who was with him also, and they were so hungry that they went to the vendor that was there, and they got a ham sandwich, and for the first time they ate ham. And they ended up sitting in a compartment on the train with 2 rabbis who shamed them the whole time. And unfortunately, after that, my grandfather said, I will never have anything to do with Orthodox Judaism. When he came back, he was able to get his family out of Germany. I remember coming across a diary that my mother wrote. It was written in Old German, and I used to speak German with my family, but I couldn't read it. It was old German, and so I prayed. I said, God, you've got to help me find out what this is saying. And I went to go visit Joshua and Monique in California, and on the way there, I sat next to a woman. This woman happened to be a German professor who knew German fluently, and she was there when we were on the plane going to California. She read the whole thing to me and translated it for me. And it was about my mother's experience at 13, leaving Germany by train to go to Switzerland and then eventually to England to get out of the country. Now, on my father's side, my grandfather was the owner of a business. It was an office supply business. And Kristallnacht came, and the Gestapo rang the bell or came to the house and said, and my grandmother answered the door and she said, you've already taken him away. Why did you come back? And so he was saved from being arrested on Kristallnacht. And I came across these stories not from my mother and father, but through literature, through papers that I found after they had passed away as I was going through my father's belongings. So none of this was told to me by my parents. They never talked about it. But I read about it in papers that they wrote, things that I was able to find. That's how I know some of their story. So that's the story.
It was very common. There were a lot of Holocaust survivors who just wouldn't talk about their experience. And then there were others who felt comfortable. And for many people, even if they didn't talk about it to their own families, it was really towards the end of their lives when they felt like this story needs to get out. As less and less people are around to continue telling the story, then there were those who have been motivated to tell their stories. And it's been 80 years. And so a lot of the Holocaust survivors are gone, and there's only, there's not a lot left. And so it's up to us, the next and the next and the next generations, to continue telling their stories and the stories of other survivors of genocide.